And thanks to this, we have turned Putin's energy blackmail into an empty threat.
Alright guys, so for over 2 years, we have heard about the great Russian decoupling, that the West is cutting Moscow off from everything. Financial sanctions were imposed and the $60 price cap on Russian oil was introduced. But even after all this, Putin's revenues aren't collapsing. In fact, it's staying resilient. Russian oil has been selling like hotcakes and prices are way above the $60 limit. This year alone, we are seeing revenues rebound to pre-war levels and they have stayed strong for 3 consecutive months. Since the price cap in December 2 years back, volumes are up and earnings have risen as well. Weren't the sanctions meant to deter people from paying the market price for Russian supply? And this brings a lot of questions to the fore. Why is the demand for Russian energy just so strong? And more importantly, who is buying this oil? Is definitely not just China or India. Back in February last year, the EU was supposed to ban all imports of Russian crude and fuel products into the Union. It's a blanket ban that covers everything, but we now have a shocking report that exposes everything. It reveals the truth about Europe's addiction to Russian oil, that they paid billions of euros for relabeled or re-exported oil from Turkey. There's still a tremendous loophole that allows Europe to indirectly obtain fuel from Moscow. And this flies in the face of Europe's pledge to get rid of all Russian imports. If oil merely transits through Turkey before making its way to Europe, can you really say you have banned fuel whose origin is Russian? Listen to von der Leyen because she makes it rather obvious in her address here. Imports from Putin have to go. That was the plan.
Today, we are addressing our dependency on Russian oil, and let's be clear, it will not be easy, because some member states are strongly dependent on Russian oil, but we simply have to do it. So today, we will propose to ban all Russian oil from Europe. This will be a complete import ban on all Russian oil, seaborne and pipeline, crude and refined.
It's pretty clear that she wants to cut away all variants of Russian oil into Europe. It's been over a year since the total ban, but it seems that the EU is still powered by Russian energy. Are there two sets of rules here? The issue here lies with the loophole in Brussels. This allows countries to buy blended fuel as long as it's labeled as non-Russian. So this is happening big time in Turkey. They are bringing in enormous volumes of oil from Moscow, mixing it up a little and then slapping a new label on it, which in essence defeats the purpose of the price cap or oil sanctions in the first place. Turkey buying volumes from Russia to sell to Europe still boosts the war chest of the Kremlin. And according to the report, Russia earned a total of 5.4 billion euros in tax revenue from Turkey's imports. So indirectly, the EU is still funding Moscow. It's another sign that banning Russian fuel from the global markets is virtually impossible. And here's how the trade allegedly works. Russia ships their oil from the port, accessing the Black Sea to Turkey. It enters the port of Ceyhan in Turkey and then gets stored at a terminal there. It said 92% of the imports were Russian in nature. The oil then gets shipped on board tankers towards the Corinth refinery in Greece for processing or distribution. The fuels then get sold into the EU market. And why is Turkey doing this? Quite simply, is to make money re-exporting oil to a market where there's a clear deficit. Because of the ban, the EU can't source fuel from Moscow directly. They either buy fuel directly from other producers like Saudi Arabia or they buy from middlemen. And this creates a big price gap or price arbitrage. And this allows countries like Turkey to make a ton of money from Europe. We buy oil from Russia, blend it a little, relabel it, and then make lots of profit. And just last year, Turkey became the world's biggest buyer of Russian oil products. And this includes diesel and gasoline. 18% of Moscow's total exports flowed into Turkey in 2023. It gets even more amazing. When Turkey re-exports this oil out to Europe, it's at a 24% markup to their imports from Russia. Now, oil trading is a razor-thin margin. 24% is a crazy profit margin. And once again, we are seeing a bizarre type of hypocrisy from Europe. We are avoiding Russian oil directly to show the world that we mean business, right? But behind the scenes, behind the curtain, we are getting re-exported Russian oil. It's a really weird kind of double standard because it's still the same stuff, just that you have to pay more, a higher price for it. And that pushes energy prices up in Europe. And in the end, Russia sells more oil. And because demand stays relatively constant just through proxies, the price will stay relatively the same. Even if it drops, it won't be by much. Now, the report also shows us who in Europe are buying the re exported oil from Turkey. According to the flows from the port of Ceyhan alone, the majority of re exports heads to Europe. More than 70% heads to Greece, the rest flows to the Netherlands, Italy, and Spain, amongst others. Interestingly enough, it seems that even a slice of the re exported oil might have gone to the US markets. A lot of Western countries are still being powered by Russian energy. And if Europe wants to stay consistent and punish Russia, this ban has to extend to re exported oil from Russia as well. There has to be consistency here. They can only buy oil straight from other producers like Saudi Arabia, the US, Norway, or Nigeria, but there's a reason why they aren't doing so because the prices will be insane. It's a clear double standard that even the Hungarian foreign minister pointed out. Europe is still feasting on Russian energy, just in an indirect way that still allows them to save some money.
That the whole European Union and the whole North Atlantic community is super, super hypocritical on that. There's a huge hypocrisy in this regard.
Specifically on the sanctions.
Yeah, and on this whole relationship with Russia. Oil. The Western Europeans are so proud of themselves. We got rid of Russian oil. You Central Europeans, you could not make it. You know, that's how much we are better than you. You know, we got rid of Russian oil. Share of Russian oil to India was below 1% before the war. Now it's very close to 40%. Before the war, Europe was not buying Indian oil. Now Europe is the #1 customer of Indian oil. Indian oil, okay? So, and since we are not buying it, I guess there are others in Europe who are buying it, and those must be those who say that they are not buying oil from Russia. So when it comes to cooperation with Russia, I understand it's very easy to say that, you know, Szijjártó is friend of Lavrov, Orban is meeting with Putin, you know, you Hungarians, you are, you know, traitors, you are the propagandists of Kremlin. Very easy to say. But when you look behind the scenes, you see that those who are accusing us, they are making much bigger business and much bigger deals with the Russians than we do.
And he's absolutely right here. Europe isn't just buying re-exported oil from Turkey, they are a big buyer of fuels from India as well. Now, India's case is a little different. They take in Russian crude for their refineries. They process it into fuels like kerosene and gasoline, which is then sold to Europe at elevated prices. India and Turkey have done nothing wrong. They are abiding by the sanctions and making money as usual. It's simply making more money from the loophole. India, for example, brought in 1.8 million barrels of Russian oil in April this year. That's a 9-month high. Russia now accounts for 38% of India's total imports. Why? Because they have a customer in Europe who can't buy from the original source. It's the EU that's suffering with a higher energy bill. While this is happening, the Russian economy is yet to collapse, and this is where another double standard happened. Borrell from the EU tried to corner India on Russian oil, but he was slapped down by their foreign minister instead.
Obviously, Mr. Borrell is not here today, not here now, but he was in the meeting, and he told the Financial Times before the meeting that the EU should be putting sanctions on refined oil products from India using Russian oil. I just wondered what the response of the minister was. Thanks.
Well, you're right. Mr. Borrell is not with us now, but I really don't see the basis for your question because my understanding of the Council regulations is that if Russian crude is substantially transformed in a third country, then it's not treated as Russian anymore. I would urge you to look at Council Regulation 833/2014.
I mean, it's just hilarious here. And if we consider the EU's purchase of Turkish oil, which is essentially transformed Russian oil, this sounds like a double standard. Once again, this shows that it is impossible to cut Russian crude away from the global markets, that the energy sanctions have essentially failed. But Europe is going to play yet another card. They plan to punish Russian energy, and this time it's going to fall on LNG. Yes, 2 years into the war, Europe is still buying gas from Russia directly. Italy bought 170 million euros worth of pipeline Russian gas in April. France, on the other hand, is the biggest importer of Russian LNG. They paid 160 million euros last month for the shipments. As the Hungarian minister pointed out, behind the scenes, Europe is still doing big business with the Kremlin. Not everything has been cut away despite von der Leyen's claims of decoupling. Europe's next move to sanction LNG is quite hypocritical as well. It revolves around punishing the world but still preserving Europe's access to Russian supply. The next round of sanctions could ban the use of EU ports from re-exporting Russian LNG. The plan, of course, is to reduce Russia's revenues without inflicting higher energy costs on EU citizens. In other words, LNG can still flow from northern Russia into European ports for domestic use. The new sanction prevents member countries from re-exporting them to third countries like China or India. And this map shows the plan. The re-export ban will cut away Russia's southern route in blue. Normally, LNG flows west towards terminals in Europe, including France and Belgium. The supply then gets re-exported eastwards towards Asian countries. The ban is going to stop this. In effect, this will narrow Russia's export options. They are left with the Northern Sea route towards China. But because of the ice, the route is inaccessible for many months of the year, and on paper, that will slow down Russian gas shipments to the world. However, here's the double standard. That doesn't stop LNG from flowing into European markets for their own use. It will affect Asian buyers like China, who could suffer a big delay in energy supply. And if this is passed, the excess LNG in Europe will be trapped in the country, in the region, and that will increase supply and actually lowers gas prices in the EU for quite a while. But as we mentioned earlier, this is a very dangerous strategy. Last year alone, China imported 6.5 million tons of Russian LNG. That's an enormous amount of energy shipped from Moscow. A lot of these volumes depend on re-exports from Europe. If the EU stops the transshipments, this will trigger a big wave of backlash from China. It threatens Beijing's energy security itself, so this is a very slippery slope. They are securing their own economy but hurting the rest of Russia's LNG customers. And if they want to make it fair, they should make it a blanket ban which includes Europe's own supply as well. We are witnessing the weaponization of global supply chains, and this is going to get messier and messier over the coming years. Even the sanctions on Russia today are filled with double standards. The US is still buying nuclear fuel from Moscow. Europe is still buying gas directly and oil products indirectly. In 2023, 9% of Europe's total gas supply comes from Russian pipelines, 6% comes from LNG, and that's 15% in total, more than the UK and Qatar combined. What is really going on here? And these are the numbers and hard facts from Europe themselves. Going after countries for trade with Russia isn't going to work. Scolding China for trading with Putin isn't being received well either. If the G7 wants the world to listen, they first need to cut off every single link they have with Russia. But that won't happen because it would cause global inflation to spike, and you can't have that during an election year. But as always, let me know what you think. Can Europe really decouple from Russian oil and gas? And will they target LNG next? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.